Hi, everybody. You made it. I'm Dave Lieber, the watchdog columnist at the Dallas Morning News, and I'm the only columnist in America that has his own flag. Everybody file a protest. It's a campaign that I've been running for about a decade. And so if you're watching this live, thank you. If you're going to watch the recording, this is being taped on April 29th, 2021. I have two special guests here today. Guys I really trust. Glenn Goodrich, the creator of propertytax.io, which is an incredible website that uses algorithms and, dare I say, artificial intelligence to tell you whether you should file a protest or not. And Will Wiggins of North Texas Property Tax Services, who I nicknamed several years ago the Shark, because he's not afraid to get in the face of appraisal districts on behalf of his customers. So let's start right away with the question that a lot of people are asking me. We'll go first with you, Will. If you're over 65 and your school taxes are frozen, should you still file a protest? Will Wiggins.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for having me. Hello, Glenn. Good to see you again. The answer is sometimes, right? Of course, that's the answer. But it can be this simple to figure that out. Not all entities freeze you're over 65. So a freeze is another word for a ceiling. All school districts are required to, however, but and most counties do. But water districts and cities, it varies. So for instance, in Tarrant County, the hospital does not honor the freeze, and maybe that's no coincidence, but that leaves about a fifth, let's call it 20% of your taxes still susceptible to increase. But in Dallas, for instance, Dallas City also doesn't, and that can be upwards of a third of your property taxes or 30% of your property tax liability. So, you know, if you're paying $10,000 in taxes in Dallas City, for instance, and they don't honor the freeze, then you still have $3,000 that's susceptible to increase. And then with the way that the markets have been climbing and the homestead limit only protecting to 10%, that's still another $350 or, you know, $30 a month that you can still be hit with every year. In that case, it would prompt you to file a protest and keep that tax liability down. But it just depends. But most, like I say, most school districts and counties do. So the majority of your tax bill is frozen, but there can always be a little bit of a portion that's still susceptible to increase, and you want to investigate that. On the flip side, Dave, here's a property tax consulting little gem for you. And the answer is that you might not want to, because if the appraisal districts are doing their job and they're keeping you at market value, for instance, let's say that your taxes were frozen 5 years ago at $10,000, and 5 years now the appraisal district keeps upping your value, and let's say that your taxes should be $15,000 now, but they're not, but they're $10,000 because you're frozen. Well, if you're planning to move in the next 3 to 5 years or something like that, you may very well want your market value to increase, because you can take a transfer certificate in a case like that, where you should be paying $15,000, but you're only paying $10,000. The district will give you, the tax district will give you a 60%, in that case, if you will, transfer certificate to take with you to the next county. So it may behoove you to keep that market value high. Just a two-sided perspective there on that answer. It just depends.
Good. Glenn, what do you think?
Well, if you're doing some estate planning and you're planning on, passing this on to your children, you might want to fight it every year to keep the taxes low on it to limit their tax burden, because the ceilings and the exemption will be taken away when it's passed on to them, and they might be stuck with some sticker shock with a really high tax bill. So for estate planning purposes, you may want to continue to pursue a reduction every year. Also, I think the answer kind of varies depending on how over 65 you are. If you're newly over 65, there is a potential, it's actually a tax ceiling, so there's a potential to get below that. It doesn't reset it, but it would save you money on your ISD taxes if you were able to get your value low enough. That usually applies to people that are, especially in this market, maybe 66, maybe 67 years old. But yeah, I would say for estate purposes, that's the main reason to keep protesting them, to keep the sticker shock down for your children or whoever's going to inherit the property.
So most of us in recent days have gotten this hated blue sheet, which is the 2021 property value notice. If you haven't gotten yours yet, you should go to your county appraisal district and look yourself up, because that's a whole nother shenanigan that they're playing in this little pyramid scheme that they call the property tax law in Texas. That's just my opinion. So I want to find out what the latest news is, how things are changed in 2021. And it looks like, Glenn, start off for me, will you? How have things changed this
Sure.
year? What do we need to know?
Sure. Well, I'm going to do this so we can have some visuals.
Good.
So the deadline is actually going to be May 17th this year. Just rack that up with confusion on deadlines. Last year, you know that we were all over the board with deadlines because of COVID. This year, we're back to normal deadlines. The normal deadline that you normally hear promoted is May 15th. This year, the deadline is May 17th because May 15th falls on a Saturday. And the law says that if the deadline to file a protest falls on a non-business day, that the deadline is automatically extended to the next business day. So that's going to be May 17th this year. That applies for Collin, Dallas, Tarrant, and Rockwall. Denton is a little bit of an outlier here. Denton had some issues with a software provider and getting some data ready. So I think they're delaying, and they also their actual appraisal district was impacted by the freeze this year. So they had some shutdown time. So they need to kind of regroup a little bit, and they are not sending out notices until they say May 14th, but we need to be a little bit flexible with that because nothing official on that yet. So we're saying mid-May is when Denton is going to mail out notices, which means that the deadline to file in Denton is going to be mid-June sometime. So stick close to that. Listen to Dave. I'm sure Dave's going to have some updates on that he'll get out in his columns when we know for sure a deadline on that. But that's the only one that's really an outlier in our area. Also, if you were noticed late by the appraisal district, which happens, like Tarrant County will notice a little bit later than normal for especially commercial properties. The deadline is actually May 17th this year, or 30 days after the appraisal district mails you your notice of appraised value, whichever is later. So if they didn't mail you your notice until May 1st, you have until May 31st to file the protest, for instance. Also, there's a lot going on with tax rates centering around Senate Bill 2. And Dave, you'd be interested in this because if you remember last year, you were kind of sounding the alarm on how there was a loophole in Senate Bill 2 with the COVID disaster. Senate Bill 2 has a provision in it. Well, basically what Senate Bill did was it went into effect in 2020, and it's a great bill that limits the increase in the tax rates for cities and ISDs. It used to be 8%. For cities, it's now 3.5% without seeking voter approval, and for ISDs, it's 2.5% without seeking voter approval. But last year, because of COVID, with the economic disaster that was declared, there was a loophole that would allow cities to increase their tax rates beyond that 3.5% without seeking voter approval. You caught wind of that early on, and you kind of sounded the alarm for it. And some called you an alarmist for it, but I'm here to tell you that you were absolutely right. And in fact, Senator Paul Bettencourt is now introducing a bill to close that loophole to prevent that from happening. The reason is because the city of Houston actually took advantage of that loophole and did it. And if you remember, the city of Dallas last year was flirting with that idea of doing it. So were several other municipalities. And so this, hopefully we can get this passed with Paul Bettencourt, who is also vital with Senate Bill 2 through, so that we can close that loophole. And because that's really not what that provision was intended for. It's more intended for natural disaster, which ironically we have this year because of the freeze that we had, which I know Will is going to get into specifics on an exemption with that. But we are at jeopardy for the tax rates being increased again without seeking voter approval because of the freeze, because Governor Abbott did declare a statewide national disaster. So it's something that we need to watch. Also of note, Fort Worth ISD voter did approve a 7.5% rate increase. This year, that was the first major city that I saw that voted to increase the tax rate. It passed by 52% in favor of that. I say all that to say that tax rates happen after the protest process. And there's a lot of information that comes out after the protest process that we aren't really made aware of that are going to impact our taxes around tax rates. So it comes back to what we're going to talk about today, which is the most direct impact you have on your tax bill is filing a protest. And so let's work with what we know right now, which is we need to file protests. There's a lot of unknowns of what can happen with tax rates down the road, but it's going to be too late to protest your taxes or your value when we know more about the tax rates later on in the year. And then also, Attorney General Paxton issued an opinion last year that's going to still be relevant this year, which was last year, if you recall, because of COVID, they were denying in-person ARB hearings. He said you don't have the right to deny a person an in-person ARB hearing. So just to reiterate again this year, because we're still kind of dealing with COVID, there's going to be no informal processes again this year, in-person informal processes. It's all going to be done remotely, just for informal. Appraisal districts are still encouraging remote ARB hearings. And if you want an in-person ARB hearing, you're likely going to have to wait until later in the year to do that outside of that normal process. That's all I've got with news.
Excellent. Thank you, Glenn. And if I was called an alarmist, I would just have to say Paul Revere was an alarmist too. Will, what kind of news do you have for us on what's happening in 2021 that's different?
A few things. It's a good segue from Glenn, so thank you. I know here, and on the option that you have when you file your protest of whether or not you want an in-person, we will certainly be declaring in-person hearings as speaking as a former appraisal district representative, I can tell you that whenever I went into my cases against the taxpayer, if they were calling in, then I thought I was in a pretty good spot, you know, to be able to convince the appraisal review board of my opinion anyway. I just feel like if you're in person, you're going to make a lot stronger of an impact. So I would certainly encourage you to not be dissuaded by the prompting to do this by Zoom or by phone, and encourage you, keeping everyone safe, of course, and following the guidelines and recommendations, of course. I mean, naturally, but I just mean I wouldn't waive that right. We're certainly not going to waive that right, as it were. So with that, Glenn mentioned the exemption, and that's a big deal. It's section 11.35 of the Texas Property Tax Code that mentions this. And actually, if you go on to Comptroller's website and just do a Google search for Form 50-312, Form 50-312, or you can go to our website, ntpts.com, and you can find it in so many places. But anyway, the deal with the temporary exemption is you still want to fight your market value down, because in order to qualify for the exemption, you need 15% of damage. You need to prove up that your improved value has suffered 15% of damage. So if you, at the end of this season, if you have a $500,000 house and $100,000 of that is in land and $400,000 is on the improvements, then you'd need about $60,000, for instance, in sustained damage, plumbing and flooring, everything that's attached to the real estate, or what you may have to disclose, for instance, if you went to sell the property, and then substantiate that, document that, and you would qualify for that temporary exemption. So I think that if there's any question about that, I mean, we'll certainly be happy to help you. I know Glenn can mention that too. I've got a slide to show you for one other thing that I think is interesting as well, in regards to the values and how that's come about this year. So let me try to share my screen here, and I'll talk about Dallas values. With regards to recent news, the Real Estate Center from Texas A&M had published at least Dallas County increases, and you know, from a county's perspective anyway, this was their results, was that last year they had an average value of $355,000 and this year at $388,000. Now that's $32,000 difference, or a 9.1% increase overall for Dallas County. And that's based on reports from Texas A&M, which is pretty solid. We always use them as an economic resource. Now, in the Dallas reappraisal, first of all, Dallas is responsible for more than $161 billion in valuation for single-family residents. It's fascinating. That's a whopping number. But this year, that increased by $7.1 billion. Now, $770 million of that, or $1 billion, 18%, if you will, over 15 to 18%, attributable to new construction. Aggressively speaking, but the majority of that being increase in market value. You could say on the whole then that Dallas only increased values by 4.3 if you looked at the total value increase, which is an interesting statistic. But there's another way to tell statistics, of course, especially when you consider that they only revalued about a third of the homes. And so here's a closer look at that. When you look at the count in Dallas, you know, the number of properties that decreased was 6,000. They decreased on an average about -4%, or an average negative decrease in value of 22,000. Another stat is that those that increased was about 193,000. And that average increase was 17%. So that's a fascinating thing when you say that as a whole, generally speaking, it all went up 7 to 8 to 9%, which we think we know is true. But when you look at their reappraisals, just on the properties that they increased, again, never mind new construction, average value there of increase of 17%. So that was interesting to us. But maybe the most fascinating thing is this, and this is due to section 2518 of the tax code that dictates that the appraisal districts only need to reappraise every 3 years. And Dave, you know more than enough about that as a recent article that you put out there where a value had stayed the same for 3 years. And that causes a lot of calamity and a lot of questions about what's going on in terms of people's values everywhere. Well, when you're only reappraising a third of the file, you may have those kind of concerns that may be out there, and really begs the question of what's going on with the other 2/3 of the county, because we certainly know that's increasing as well. So with that, I think that ties back into that over 65 question. As a matter of fact, you know, it's like if you are considering a transfer certificate, well, you may want to hang on until your reappraisal year so that you have a true market value, you know, to take with you when you go. But just some comments there. I thought that was fascinating this year in terms of Dallas's reappraisal file.
Good job, Shark. So I asked you guys to tell us the latest news, and now for the second part of our seminar here, I asked you each to prepare a presentation of ideas and concepts that you think the audience needs to know. And just for those watching, the recording will be available. It'll be available in my Sunday column online and all of my social media streams pretty soon after this thing ends, when we can get it loaded and put it out. So look for it, because I know you'll want to look at those slides. So Will, what presentation have you prepared for the audience today?
Yeah, I've got some general guidelines first, and then I'll show you some exhibits and hope to help with that. I have a two-part proposal for you. One is, how do you win? How do you win a persuasive argument or an appraisal? And what are the concepts that you have to worry about? Let's dig into that first of all. It's really simple. Grab your pen and pad, because it's over in 10 seconds. Comps and adjustments. Sales comps, there you go. Sales comps and adjustments. So which comps are you going to pick, and what adjustments are you going to make? That's all it ever is. And for instance, in Tarrant, it's a very simple defense system where they show you about 7 adjustments. You got size, land, garage, pool, outbuildings, other features, and then effective age. And I'll circle back with that. I'll actually close with that, because that's one of the most interesting pieces. But remember, 2 concepts. How do you pick your comps, and how do you adjust them? And in Tarrant, it's a simple schedule of those very simple concepts. If it has a pool, you take it out. If it doesn't, you know, so on and so forth. If you're comparing yourself to something that sold with a pool, then you would take that sale price and you'd remove the value of the pool. And then that should give you an indication, if all else, ceteris paribus is the Latin component there. But if all else is the same, then then it ought to make sense that your property, if everything were the same and doesn't have a pool, then it would sell for X. And so you do that over 2 or 3, 4 times, and then you come to a median or an average value, depending on where you want to put your weight of your property. And so most of you may know that if you have some kind of familiarity, but again, with realtors, it gets a little bit more complex as follows. In Dallas, for instance, Dallas will entertain the price per foot argument, but I would caution realtors and CMAs, or comparative market analysis, and anyone with a real estate background I would just caution you before you go in there with the price per foot argument, if you're not going to make adjustments, because it's just an index of 2 numbers. It's just a percentage, if you will, of 2 numbers. And well, you have to adjust for the same thing. So by that last example, if you took the pool value of that sale and divided it by the square footage, then you might have a $1 per foot adjustment that you need to make, for instance, to that for the premiums, or whatever you like about that, or whatever's different about it. So in Dallas, I think that's one of the big cases. They throw the book, though, at the adjustment schedule. So they adjust. Dallas will adjust everything from roofs to baths to you name it. Even some acronyms in there that you're probably not going to understand. And there's an element there of expertise where that's why we kind of separate ourselves, us tax consultants, from just anyone that understands real estate valuation. You have to know the game. You have to know the rules. You have to know the law. And it can be intimidating, but I'll tell you that it shouldn't be unreasonable. It should make sense, you know, whatever they're doing. And those acronyms are nothing but that. They're just fancy words for, as a matter of fact, I would implore you, if you go in there, to have them explain what that means and make sure that that makes sense to you too. And it just doesn't sound like talk. So Denton and Colin, on the other hand, they use the same software. So they use they also use appraisal approaches that tend to make everybody look very similar. So again, I'll share my screen here and I'll get into a little bit of that, you know, as an explanation as well. So let's see. You can see here. This is, I know you may have to zoom in, but that's okay. You know, this is not for anything other than a demonstration purpose, but this is an example of our grid. And I've highlighted some things that really you need to pay attention to, because when you go to pick your comps, you want to look at, again, grab your pen, size, age, and neighborhood. Okay, but the neighborhood code here is just that. They're not going to tell you the name of the neighborhood. They're going to put it in a neighborhood code, and that's up here. And there's other factors that go with it. Well, sometimes they have multiple subdivisions that they squeeze into a single neighborhood code. And sometimes, in my opinion, those neighborhoods don't compete. For instance, gated communities should not be in the same neighborhood code as a non-gated community. And the district will try to argue that those are comparable, but I think there's a clear distinction there that that they shouldn't be, and maybe they're not. So think about that when you look at your comps and whether or not they're in the same subdivision, and how that compares to district's neighborhood code. Colin also uses a class. They all use classes in quality of construction. You got to kind of consider whether or not the true quality of construction is any different than yours, or better or worse. That's in this line, for instance. But I want to point your attention to these two highlights. This is an adjustment up. So for my client, they're trying to add 5,700 in value here for an attached garage. And where this sale has a 600 square foot garage, and we have a 700 square foot attached garage, they're saying that the sale, we should add 5,000 in value for that difference. And that's suspect to me. And I'll show you why here in a sec. And then you'll see an adjustment here for 7,000 in land. Well, my software tells me that this is valued by the lot. And that basically says, well, all the lands are the same. You know, the land, these are valued on a per lot basis. And so they're pretty much all the same. But on my client, they put this little adjustment here, this 105% adjustment on their land. And that's what's prompting that $7,500 adjustment there. So I know that going in there, you need to go into that too. But look, here's the difference of those two. You see any difference here? I mean, these are both corner lots that the appraisal district has already recognized should be valued on a per lot basis. So why would we get a premium? Why are you adjusting up 7,500 in this case? Why? Make them explain that. I mean, that's a hard explanation to me right there. But they're going to tell you it's because of size. But again, what is the utility in that additional little bit of size when all of these are valued on a per lot basis? It's a tough question to ask, and maybe a tougher question to defend. This is an example of that garage. If this is the square root of those two values, here they were in the square footage right here. And if they were truly just squares, let's say, well, then you're only talking about 1.5 feet on both sides. I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to walk into a market or a property that's for sale and be able to distinguish whether or not you got 1.5 feet on either side. And that's just a hypothetical. But the point is, are we really coming back to that selling broker and saying, I think you need to knock off 10,000 because I'm not buying that additional attached garage space, or you're saying the land's bigger, but I don't see any additional utility. Heck, I mean, 10% of it's on the curb that has curb cuts in it, for instance. So anyway, that's an example of how they're adding value to this client that affects what, $300 a month in taxes. And I'm not saying there's not merit to it, but all I'm suggesting is that sometimes embedded in those adjustments can be just theory, and a lot of times on the surface that may not be the reality. So pay attention to some of those details is really the trick of the trade. So my second part is, how do you pick an agent? And as I say, this stuff can be intimidating, and sometimes you need to be able to talk through it. You need all the information. So here's some good questions, and everybody's happy to, again, go to ntpts.com. This is all there. But here's some good questions to ask. Can you ever meet in person? Like you see our faces, but and I think that's huge. Will you ever be able to put a face to a name? I like that we get to see Glenn every year. I know who he is. I see him in the appraisal districts, but some of these other firms, I never see anybody. And so who are they and where are they from? Or do you actually know who's ever representing? Can you talk to them personally? When you talk to, are you going to represent my account so I can call you and talk to you and your name is John Smith? Great. Can I come to your office? I mean, we have people come in, we'll show them the evidence. And so that's a big key for me. Where are they headquartered? You know, are they a Houston-based firm or are they a Dallas-based firm? So I think relationships are key, and there's some of the key points to think about. Area expertise. So how long have they been in Dallas? You know, we're based, like I say, based right here in Addison. Our consultants, our new consultants, you got to go to a hearing 200 times. You got to sit in there and say you're going to testify under oath, and then listen to your seniors as they give advice and talk to these ARB panelists, and before we ever grant them any power to do any hearings. So, you know, have some seasoning. Here at our firm combined, we have 98 years combined. It's pretty fascinating in property tax experience. So for all you know, you've got some guy, it's his first year, he just got a license, he's not even from here, he's a realtor, and he knows less than you about, frankly, your property. In that case, I would advise that you do it yourself. You know, if you can't substantiate that your agent has this kind of experience. So I'll just close. Can you cancel anytime? Look at these contracts. Can you cancel? You know, or are they trying to lock you in, or do you get to cancel anytime? I know we promote that, and I hope good companies will do that the same. You know, but this is a big one. This is probably my biggest one: is can you see their evidence? You ought to be able to call them at any time and say, "Show me what you're going to present. Show me what you did. Show me what you created." If they say that they destroy their evidence, or they don't have it, or something like that, then it was probably never created. So be able to ask that general question is can I see the evidence that you're going to present to the appraisal review board? I think that's huge as well. So, and here's another big one: how many can they handle? Okay, so you got to realize that all the appraisal districts, they want to certify these values by mid-July. Okay, so we're talking about roughly 6 weeks. That's maybe 30 days. If you can do in a hearing day, you can do 50 accounts per day. That's reasonable. That's less than 2,000 per agent. So in Tarrant County, for instance, we have, but right there, we have about 2,000, and we got to watch that closely. But here's an example, say, of some others. This is Tarrant County and an agent parcel count. So you can see between these three firms, that's more than half of the representation in Tarrant County. So you would hope that the biggest firm here has, what, by that estimate, more than 9 agents, you know, representing. And otherwise, how are you handling each account on its own and giving each account an individual review? I'm not sure that that's possible or even feasible. So so be cautious of that. How many accounts per agents do you have? I think that's a key question, and one that would be able to tell you. So, and here's a result of that. I mean, when you look at the homeowners, this is how many homesteads got reductions last year in Tarrant, and their average reduced value. But this again is a big number for a firm to have and represent, whereas this is us. And I'm not saying that this is the best, but the point is if you keep a low number, you're probably going to have better results. It's as simple as that. So again, I challenge you on that. I challenge anybody that's looking at an agency to consider, do they have the manpower to give me the type of service that I deserve in an individual review? I think that's huge. So that was it, Dave. I think overall, those are my suggestions, or what I could come up with for what we think is a good and quality service. But I'll let Glenn take it from there.
In a minute, we're going to talk about how to actually do a property tax protest for those on the call who don't know anything about it. But Glenn, what kind of presentation have you prepared for us?
Yeah, I've got a presentation, but I've got a little cleanup to do first from last year. So last year I had mentioned a particular football coach and quarterback, and I got in a lot of trouble for doing that. So this year I brought my signed autographed football from Emmitt Smith, and we're on draft day. So why I brought this wasn't just for makeup, but I like the story behind Emmitt Smith, because he one of the things I always liked about him was if he had a bad game, he always followed it up with one of his better games. And so I'm hoping that what we're doing in this seminar today is, if you've had a bad experience protesting in the past, that we can help you file a better protest and be more successful in the future. And so with that, I'm going to get started on my presentation. I do have a company called propertytax.io. I want to start off with why I still protest with the homestead cap. I think that's really relevant today because we're in such a hot market. The values are skyrocketing, and we have an online chat on our website, and we get this question a lot. So I thought it was worth it to dedicate a little bit of time to that. And so when deciding to pursue a protest, those with the homestead cap, they often abandon the protest because they believe if they can't reduce their market value below their appraised value, there's no point because they can't save money on their tax bill this year. And I think that's a mistake. It is true that you do have to reduce your current appraised value to save on your upcoming tax bill, But where the misnomer is that obtaining a reduction above your appraised value is pointless and it'll never help you save money on your tax bill. I actually am personally benefiting from not following that advice. So I'm going to walk you through my personal experience with this issue and why it benefits me in 2021 that I didn't throw in the towel on my 2020 protest. So my 2020 notice of appraised value was 365, and I had a homestead cap set at 317. So that's a big delta there that I have to overcome to start saving money. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to produce the evidence to get my value below 317. So why did I still pursue the protest? Well, before I get into that, let me just tell you how quick it can be to go through the protest process. So with just a little bit of a time investment, you can obtain these results. I spent about 15 minutes filing an online protest, and I had used an automated report from our website to submit as evidence. So if you're not using an automated report like I provide, or if somebody just didn't prepare all the evidence for you, the 15 minutes going to go up a little bit because it's going to take you more time to gather evidence and analyze it. So you might have more time investment on the upfront than I did. But DCAT emailed me, not surprisingly, said, hey, no go, we're not going to reduce your value. Well, that took me less than a minute to analyze and say, well, I'm not going to stand for that. DCAT's a little different from other appraisal districts, especially during this remote time that we're in with the informal process specifically, in that you can actually call DCAT and have a little bit of a back and forth with the district appraiser to try to get the value down a little bit, ask them what comps they're using and have a discussion. So for instance, like in Collin County, it's mainly just they send you their comps that they're using and there's no back and forth. You either accept what they did or go to the ARB directly. That's a little bit of a difference between the appraisal districts in our area. So if you're in Dallas, you can do this, but if in Collin, you might not be able to do this. So I did this call and I had a 10-minute back and forth and I got the value reduced to 351, which is still well above my 317 value. I wasn't, honestly, I wasn't thrilled with that value, but in fairness, the comps really were not much in my favor that year. So I just took it. And here's a little side note about what that back and forth entailed. I asked what the comps the appraisal district was looking at. I was looking at the photos and the MLS comments of those comps, and I noticed that I'm in an area that is kind of in a turnaround area where a lot of houses are being flipped and updated, and so there's a discrepancy in conditions. Mine's a 1950 year built house, and so the comps that the appraisal district were using, they'd all been updated, and so I brought that to his attention. I had the photos, and I had also submitted some photos with my protest from the appraisal that was done on my property that showed the interior of the property and everything. And or if you don't have that, you can go on Zillow to look up photos and MLS comments. After that back and forth, the district appraiser agreed to lower my value to 351. So obtaining a reduction above a homestead cap can potentially set the bar lower for next year. And that's really what I'm trying to get to, is it's benefiting me this year. I'm protesting again this year, and I'm asking for $340,000. This would save me about $225 to $250 in taxes, because I'm going to be able to get below my new homestead cap of $349,000. So just to kind of recap, there's a lot of numbers that were thrown in that. I was noticed at 365 last year, and I had a homestead cap at 317. I got my market value reduced to 351, which was still well above that 2020 homestead cap. They noticed me again. They did not increase my value. The appraisal district technically doesn't have to reappraise except for every 3 years. So they kept my value at 351 this year, but since my homestead cap was so far below my market value, it automatically increased up that maximum of 10%, which equated to 349. So there's just a little bit of a delta between my market value and my homestead cap this year. And I think I can get the good comps to get me down to 340 this year, which is going to be below my new homestead cap. Had I not done that, I would be starting at 365 this year instead of 351. And I would be asking for a $25,000 reduction instead of an $11,000 reduction. And I think it's easier for a decision maker, whether it be a district appraiser or a panel, an ARB panel, to grant me a smaller reduction than it is a larger reduction. So that's why I think it's worth it for you to be consistent and stay with it every year, even if you can't save money, because you never know how the stars are going to align the next year for you. So I really like that Will talked about evidence in his presentation, and it just highlights and emphasizes why I respect North Texas property tax in the industry. And really what I think the distinction between the two groups of agents, and going back into Will's point about hiring an agent, is, are you an evidence-based company or are you a marketing-based company? If you're an evidence-based company, the proof is in your work product. If you're a marketing-based company, you're making all these promises, but it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz kind of thing. There's nothing behind the curtain really with it. North Texas is definitely an evidence-based company, and I am also an evidence-based company. But I'm going to teach you now how to do the evidence yourself. And if you even want to spend the time to do that. So a good way to get a reduction without hiring an agent is there's two ways mainly. And I say easy. If you have estimates for needed repairs, like a foundation estimate, an agent's really not going to add a whole lot of value. If that's the sole basis for a reduction, they're just going to be passing on paperwork that you would provide to them. So you'd probably be better off handling that protest yourself for that foundation estimate. Now, just because you do have a foundation estimate, I still strongly encourage you to look at comps and recent sales in your area to see if that information can also help you. If you recently purchased your home for less than what the appraisal district has you on for, and you have a HUD-1 and an appraisal that can back that up, the purchase price, generally the sale has to have occurred, in this case, after March of 2020. I know that if you're in Collin County, that's going to be a little bit harder because they're going to argue price appreciation, but Dallas County tends to accept sales prices around that daytime. That kind of information, you have a really high likelihood of getting a reduction close to what you paid on it, or maybe exactly what you paid, but not guaranteed, of course. Now, I would estimate that's probably a 30-minute time investment if you have one of those two issues to do. So it's well worth it, and you may not need to hire a consultant and save some money by not paying a percentage of the savings if you're going to do that. Now, there's definitely good reasons to hire a consultant where they add value, especially being consistent and filing protests for you year after year. So now what I want to get into is outside of where I see the vast majority of protests used, which is recent sales. And keep in mind, there's an upfront time investment. Dave, you wrote an article about this last year about a UTD study that estimated a hassle cost of filing a protest of $200 to $250 for the time it takes to gather. And I bold analyze, and I'll get into why I bolded that later, analyze evidence to file a protest and negotiate the value with the appraisal district and attend the ARB hearing. That's a lot of time and effort. So they estimate a hassle cost of about $200, $250 for that, which might be reason enough for you to want to hire an agent if you just don't want to deal with that. And that's also exactly why I launched my website in 2017, when at that time we were just selling evidence. We've now expanded into agent services, but I was helping people gather the evidence and coach them through the process to reduce that hassle cost. Now, if you just want the very easy button and you're the kind of person that if I don't get my reduction after I submit the online appeal, I'm probably going to give up and lose steam in the process and not go to my ARB hearing, which we see a lot of people do. Like I think only 50% generally of the people actually show up for their ARB hearing because they lose steam in the protest. It wasn't easy for them. You know, they filed it and it didn't work out in the informal and they don't want to go to the ARB hearing. If you know that that's probably going to be you might be better off just right off the bat hiring an agent, because it's harder to hire an agent later on as we get into the protest season, especially after the deadline. And so you don't want to roll the dice and say, oh, I'll try this, and if it doesn't work out, I can always hire somebody later. It's actually kind of hard to hire people later because we're already in our administrative processes, rolling with our existing client base.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If I don't hire an agent and I want to use recent sales as a basis for a reduction, like what should I do? You can get a list of sales from a realtor, and there's going to be some overlap with what Will talked about and what I talked about, but I'll kind of come at it from a different angle. But I like that because that shows where we are both on the same page with how to do evidence. You can get a list of sales from a realtor, but that should only be your first step. A list of sales is not a valuation report. It's good information that you can use. So every appraisal district adjusts sales prices to arrive at an indicated value. Adjustments account for differences in land condition, additional features. Additional features is where I see a lot of people off on why they think their value should be valued the same as a sale. And that, you can really only get additional improvement values through open records requests. So a price per square foot is a big misnomer on how to value real estate, and the appraisal district doesn't do that. So what do you do after you get a list of MLS sales? You can go on the appraisal district's website and start supplementing that information with data points that the appraisal district uses that MLS does not use. So MLS does not have land values, the appraisal districts do. So look up what that comp's land value is and how it compares to your land value. And if there's a difference there, you need to make that adjustment. The building quality rating, that's going to be called, that's different terminology for the appraisal district. And in Dallas, they call it the class code. And Collin, they call it the building quality rating. but basically it's quality of construction. Are you pulling a sample of sales, or 3 to 6 sales that are the same building quality rating as you? Are you doing an apples to apples comparison? Or a lot of people, what they do is they pick low sales in their neighborhood, and they go in there and the appraisal district says, oh, well, that's a lower building quality rating than you, so we're not going to use it because we're going to use these other properties that are the same building quality rating as you. And so you've gone in there with a mistake. You thought, I'm going to use this evidence to get me down, and they quickly blow it up because they just have to do a few clicks of a mouse and they've blown up your argument if you do that. Also, condition ratings. Dallas calls it CDU ratings. Others call it effective year build. Is there an adjustment that needs to be made for that? So what adjustments should you make? Now, adjustments get really complicated, and I am the product of 2 appraisers. My mom's is an appraiser and my dad's an appraiser. So I kind of grew up in that world. That's definitely not most people. And a lot of people that really work a lot with real estate still struggle with how to make adjustments. So at a minimum, I think you should make the land adjustment. That's pretty easy to go and look at the appraisal district's website and see what's the comp's land value versus my land value and make that adjustment. Where it starts to get a little harder is additional improvements like pools. The adjustment you would make for a pool would vary on the value of the property. If you have a really expensive property, you might adjust $80,000 for the pool. If you kind of have a normal, median valued property, you might adjust $20,000 for the pool. We actually do open records requests from the appraisal district and get their adjustments just to see what they're at. A little asterisk with that, and kind of highlighting another point on what Will said, was there's an actual case last year where is that beeping coming from me or okay? I hear a beeping sound, but the appraisal district had said that I'm gonna take these off. Can everybody hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was getting a beeping sound. I think mine was running out on AirPods. Okay, sorry about that. I have a microphone. So I'm going to get into now. So the adjustments are a little hard that you make. Look at the adjustments. We saw the appraisal district making a $4,000 adjustment on a pool when they should have been making $25,000. So just look at those kinds of things. After you make the adjustments, decide which comps help and hurt your case for a reduction. Determine which comps are most similar to yours. Use those. Here's where you get gold stars. If you compare your interior photos to the property's interior photos to highlight why it's more similar to your property. And you get another gold star if you use a map. If you show how locationally similar the comps are to yours. And then submit that information to the appraisal district in an online protest. Here's how we structure our evidence to look, and you can kind of follow this as a guideline. So just maybe get a Word document. Number one is just state what's your opinion of value. What do I think the property is valued at? A lot of people miss that. They just submit evidence, but they don't tell them, here's what I think my value should be. So just make that very obvious. Here's what my value should be. I like to provide an overview map of where the subject is located, where your property is located, because if you're in an ARB hearing, a lot of questions that the ARB has is, where's this property located? If you start providing evidence to the ARB before they ask a question, you're getting their trust, because you're showing them that you know the questions they're going to ask and you're preemptively answering those questions. So a big arrow, just where's this property located? We do the adjustments. We get to the adjusted value and we show how we get to the adjustments, but use a map like this. Here's your value. And then maybe some quick statistics about the comp, like the size of it, the year built. We do the building quality ratings, the neighborhood codes like Will was talking about, if it has a pool or not, the land value, and then our adjusted value. And here's where it gets, the adjustments are really where a lot of people get stuck. I went to A&M, so I have a Tex Ags thing here, but this is from Houston, and it really speaks to what a lot of people encounter is, what are the following adjustment calculations and how are they determined? He said TTL cost factor, percent goods, sub area difference. And here's what he did. He took a house with the same floor plan in his same neighborhood that was noticed at 11,000 less than him. And he went in, and after all the quote unquote adjustments were made, it almost equaled what he had. So basically the appraisal district said, well, after we make all of our adjustments, it indicates a value exactly what we noticed you at. And so he missed all the adjustments. So here's what that really looks like. And we modify our adjustments to based on the appraisal district that it's in. But you can see how different, I'm not going to go through all these, but you can see how different appraisal districts are and how they value real estate. This is Houston on the left. Look at all those adjustments that they're doing. And this is Collin on the right. And so it's just two totally different systems. That's why it's hard to provide general property tax information to the public, because it's really based on which county you're in. This is an example of how I do side-by-side comparisons of your kitchen versus a comp to show that, and just say it would take me $25,000 to make my kitchen look like this. Also, I'd want to follow up that we have a help website, help.propertytax.io, that's free. You don't have to have a registered account for us. And I just searched how to file a protest, and you saw articles that pop up, like we have screenshots and everything of how to file a protest in Dallas County, Tarrant, Denton, all that walks you through that process. So hopefully that can save you some time, at least on that effort. And that's all I've got, Dave.
Really nice, Glenn. I appreciate it. I made a few notes that I'd like to share with people. The first is, I think everybody who's thinking about doing this needs to go to your appraisal district website, look up your property, make sure the homestead exemption is on there, and just poke around, look at your neighbor's tax property values and stuff. Don't be scared about going to your appraisal district website. Next, I want everybody to pay attention to those deadlines. I don't think you should wait until the last day or 2 days before the May 17th deadline or the June deadline in Denton. I really think you should get ahead, because things can go wrong. Also, when you have questions, I mean, I don't really know the answer. I usually send people to the appraisal district and say, call your appraisal district and ask them, because like Glenn said, it's different. And also the Texas Controller's Office in Austin, they used to have, and I'm sure they still do, but instructional videos on how to file a tax protest. And so now that bell means it's time for the lightning round. I've got a lot of questions here, and so I'd like you guys to answer them as fast as you possibly can. You guys ready? We'll go another 14 minutes or so. All right, here we go. This one's for you, Glenn, because this is a former customer of yours. My question is, my appraisal amount is the same as last year. Should I file a protest?
Yes, I have, as an agent representing people, I have obtained reductions on people that have actually had value decreases. It's what the comps are for that year. What happened to the value? Decrease, stay the same, increase. The action should be driven by, can you produce evidence to get a reduction? And so yes, absolutely, you should at least consider filing a protest. Look at the comps.
This is for you, Will, the Shark Wiggins. Land value portion of tax assessment, can it be changed through the protest process?
I hate to say the answer is typically no, but it shouldn't be no. Whenever you go into a protest hearing, typically the ARB likes to they tend to stay away from that. It's like an unwritten rule. I hate to tell you, but here's how. Take the land out of it. Take your improvement value and look at sales around you. See if you can find some land sales is really the best way to go about that, and really say, on a price per foot, as long as they're within a reasonable size of each other, that's probably your best way to substantiate that. But without getting into too many specifics there, I know that's one of the tougher arguments to make, but hey, let me bring it back home to a relative comparison. Like, you may not be able to challenge or find evidence on the level of value out there, but look at the relative comparison and ask whether or not that makes sense. Are there economies of scale because this lot is twice the size of mine, and are they going dollar for dollar at a linear rate of valuation, or are we know that there are economies of scale here, and are they applying that the right way too? So I'd take a relative reference at that too.
Okay, Glenn, this is for you. On the Dallas Central Appraisal District website, this person has two exemptions. The first is labeled homestead. The second is labeled other. Is that my over 65 exemption?
Most likely, it was a new law that was passed a couple of years ago that the appraisal district could not publicly show over 65 exemptions on their websites to prevent people from targeting over 65 people for marketing purposes. And so they classified other, but that other could be disabled. But if you know you have an over 65 exemption and it says other, high likelihood that that's the over 65 exemption.
Okay, good. Will, explain what the 10% cap is, please.
Sure, it's simple. Every year, the appraisal district tries to value your property at market value. If last year your value was 500,000 and this year they put it at 800,000, which happens, then that's an incredible increase. But the homestead cap would prevent you from anything more than a 10% increase on your taxable value. Now, the terminology for the taxable value in Dallas is capped, and Colin is assessed, and in Tarrant it's appraised. You know, we've joked about that before. There should be one number on it, but just know that whatever your value was that was used to tax, your taxable value, they take out your exemptions and then they multiply times the mill rate. That's how you get your taxes. Well, that taxable value cannot go up more than 10% if you have a homestead exemption. So in that example I gave, it should be no more than 550.
Well, what happens if you open up your blue property value notice and it's 12%? What do you
Sure.
do?
There, of course, there's always exceptions, right? The only time that that's allowed to go higher than that is when you have a contributory value or new construction or new improvements that weren't there before, and they're allowed to capture that value, of course.
It can also go up the year after the purchase. Your homestead cap goes away the year after you purchase a property for just that
Yeah, so
1 year.
So technically, Glenn, just in the business, and this can be a confusing piece, but one that everybody should be aware of is, technically speaking, those homestead exemptions are tied to the owner. A lot of people don't realize that. They kind of assume that it's tied to the
Right.
property, for instance, but as far as the records are kept, and it is important to know that prior exemption was tied to that owner, and you have a new exemption.
Right.
Maybe a good way to think about that. Yeah.
Oh, Glenn, the question is, I've used Zillow in the past to gather recent selling prices of houses near me, but sometimes they are not disclosed. What other data sources can I use to get comps, comparable properties?
Well, Zillow is notorious for not having great, it's opt-in with the agents, and Texas is a non-disclosure state, and the agents are highly encouraged to not give Zillow that information because they want to maintain their lock on the MLS system. So I would not really trust anything off of Zillow as far as sales prices. You can get a realtor to send you information. On my website, you can register an account. We provide you sales price information straight from MLS because we have a broker's license. But yeah, you would need somebody who has access to the MLS system to get verified sales price. Also, you can do open records requests from the appraisal district, and they have to tell you the sales that they're using to value your property.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Will, if you're having 2021 home renovations done by a general contractor, should you supply a copy of the contract and ask for a reduction of market value equal to the contract value?
It's not relevant. The appraisal date is as of January 1st. It's how the property stood as of January 1. So and then there's another component of cost to cure. Aesthetics is up to you how you're going to promote. If you change from standard countertops to marble countertops, for or a remodel or something like that. But the cost to cure should be functionality. You know, if your plumbing's bad and you have to get that repaired, well, the bigger question is, was your plumbing bad as of January 1?
Right. Glenn, do you have any tips for challenging an appraisal of a rural property with a house and acreage?
Oh man, land sales, land information is hard to go by. That's going to be a tough one. So I'm going to save a lot of time on this one and kind of punt on that one. That's really not my forte. I more specialize in single family residential. So maybe you condition stuff on the property itself, but getting the land value down, maybe you could look for an ag exemption if you don't have it already. But land sales are hard to come by.
Okay.
I'd only challenge that or add to that, Dave, by saying make sure you're aware of floodplains, and if you're going to use comps, find comps that are within 5% of the size too before you start throwing around prices per acre, et cetera.
Okay. Will, if the appraisal value is substantially below the market value of my home, is there a reason to protest the valuation?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to what, and by appraised value, I mean the cap value in Tarrant is what I'm assuming, or assessed value. Yes. If it's less than or different than the market value, the answer still goes back to what Glenn said, and it's yes in his first exhibit. The point is you're looking at longevity and kind of the basis for next year. You don't want to let that market value run rampant. You know, if it's wrong, and you need to fix it. And it's going to probably help you. If it doesn't help you now or this year, if you don't get it underneath per se, it can very well help you in the future and save you a lot of money.
I'll give this one to you also, Will, because it kind of follows up. My house does not have a garage, but all the comps around me have a garage. I know this drops the value overall, and I have continued to fight my appraisal every year. How can I get past this annual difficulty and receive a valuation that is more true to my property's real value?
Yeah, more true is what I heard there, and I'm sure what your appraiser is going to hear too. And the question is, if you have 3 comps and they do have garages, the appropriate adjustment, and this is what the appraisal review board is aware of, and the appraisal districts are aware of, and it's in the law. It's actually written in the law, appropriate adjustment. Are they making the appropriate adjustments for that? You know, at 40, 50 a foot or whatever it's going to be. I mean, the point is, are they making an adjustment? You can challenge that adjustment and the quantity of it and substantiate it, et cetera, but is it even present in their evidence? And that's the real big thing. Make sure they're aware that you don't have one. And are you marking those sales down or bringing them down for the fact that they have a premium in the value of the garage?
Glenn, this one's for you. We do have a lot of people watching this now and who will watch the recording who are not from North Texas, but spread out across the state of Texas. And so one question is, are property tax rules and laws different from county to county, or are they the same all across the state? Is it true if I win a protest in my value, it can't be increased the following year? So those are 2 good questions.
Okay, if you win a protest one year, can it be increased in the next year? If you got that, no, it can be increased next year. Now, as far as, and we're laughing because Will and I work in multiple counties, they are vastly different in multiple counties. For instance, in Collin, they have a cutoff. This is both an ARB rule and an appraisal district rule, that they have a cutoff for sales that they won't consider after January 31st of 2021. You go to Dallas, just south of that, and you can get sales that are in May or June of that year, depending on when your hearing is. That's just one quick example. We could have a whole hour seminar on how different they are, but they're vastly different on where you are. And that's probably a frustration of offering general advice on property tax.
Oh, good. Will, when it comes to protesting my property tax, does it make a difference if I go into the office or do it online?
To me, it makes a difference. If you can go in, if you can do it yourself, then don't cut yourself short by doing it through a Zoom. Get in there, get in the faces, make sure you're making eye contact with people when you present the evidence and what you have to say, and make sure they're looking at you when they try to convince you of something different. Yeah.
Glenn, do you have any advice for getting homes reappraised that have been rebuilt after the October 20th, 2019 tornado? Appraisals have skyrocketed.
Yeah, well, hopefully, first off, you qualified for the reappraisal that they did in January 2019, or that they did in the fourth quarter of 2019. If they didn't do that and you filed permits and all of that, you're just gonna have to argue the value based on what it would sell for on January 1st of this year. I know the values have gone way up, but a lot of people have done work to it that like Will was talking about, allows you to exceed that 10% because there's new improvements done to the property. So you just have to look at comps, look at cost schedules. What did you actually spend on it? And maybe dispute it based on, you think that I had, $100,000 worth of work done, but I only had $75,000 worth of work done, that kind of thing.
Will, let's say, let's see, I've lost my spot here. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
We've been asked a lot of questions here in the chat about pools. Will, so how do pools affect this?
How do pools?
Yeah, swimming pools.
Yeah, it's an improvement. It's a feature. And when you add a pool, the district certainly has a right to capture that value. Now that's over and above what your otherwise market value would have increased. It's what's known in the industry as a contributory value. And it's important, economically speaking, for the state comptroller and districts alike and taxing entities to be aware of that new construction value. So it's certainly something that they watch closely. And yes, that is a susceptible to tax increase.
Hey, Dave, I also saw some questions that were asked, do the pools, are they qualify for the disaster exemption? And they do qualify for the disaster exemption because they are improvements, like Will was saying.
Yeah, part of the real estate, sure.
Okay. This goes to either one of you. I've heard from different people that it's smart to do an open records request to the appraisal district ahead of time to get the information that they have on you, because if they don't supply it in time, you can actually get that information tossed out. Can you tell us how that works?
Well, Glenn, I'll go first to speak on that. One of our frustrations is not getting open records requests timely, but those have to do with true open records requests. That's very different than a 41-461, which is a request for evidence. The district must show you within 2 weeks of your hearing, must show you the evidence that they intend to produce at hearing. So that way you can be prepared. I mean, that only makes sense, but that's very different than a general open record, or specific rather, open records request for general public data. And yes, there are, they have to conform to rules on that too. But just like Glenn was saying, that is the law across Texas, but how that law is interpreted from county to county can be frustrating and time consuming to deal with.
Let's say you did not get your blue property tax notice in the mail. What does that mean, Glenn?
Well, if you're not in Denton County, that means your deadline to file is still going to be May 17th. Now, the appraisal district does not have to send you a notice of appraised value if your value did not increase. Now, my value did not increase, but my appraised value increased. And so DCAD still sent me a notice of appraised value. So if you didn't receive a notice, that means that your value was probably not increased, or if it was it was sent to you and you missed it, you just need to look into, are you mailing it to the wrong place? But your deadline would still be May 17th to file a protest, unless they just failed to notice you, which rarely happens, but does happen. And you should look
The
into
last
that.
question for you, Will. Let's say you lose your appraisal review board decision. There's two things you can do after that. One is file a civil lawsuit in court, and the other is to go to binding arbitration.
Yeah, that's
What do you
right. Those are the two most common issues, or most common paths. Arbitration probably being the most frequent now. But yeah, you got a specific window, a turnaround, depending on which avenue you choose, 45 or 60 days. And then, yes, you're assigned to an independent arbitrator from the state, should you choose arbitration, or you can file in district court.
The goal of my Everybody File a Protest campaign is to basically just throw so many protests at them that they have to mass settle. And sometimes that does work. I would like to thank everybody for joining us. We have non-subscribers to the Dallas Morning News on here. And if you subscribe to the paper, dmn.pub/watchdog, that'll help me, because they do keep track. And I'll be doing a lot of property tax stories, along with all my other subjects like electricity in the coming weeks. So we are great value. I'd like to thank the Dallas Morning News Rewards Program for hosting us. And I especially want to thank all the people who tuned in to watch it live, and also who watched the recording. So thank you, Glenn Goodrich, and thank you, Will Wiggins, the Shark. And we'll hopefully, we sent a lot of people out here who are going to save some serious money.
Go get them.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank
Good
you,
luck
audience.
this year.